All right. So, welcome everyone. My name is Lior. I'm your host on behalf of the International Diplomacy Initiative today. And first of all, welcome. I'm always happy to see new faces joining us. We are about to announce the beginning of a new series of webinars going with current events. And we are pleased to host Dr. Esther Lopatin. Dr. Lopatin is a European affairs expert and a faculty member at the Division of Foreign Languages at Tel Aviv University. She holds a PhD in political science from the Ludwig Maximilians University of Munich. She has a very diverse and academic and professional background, so I have to apologize, I won't be able to cover all of it. Her credentials are very long. But just a few highlights. She was a lecturer at George Washington University while also serving as a visiting scholar at the Institute for the Study of International Migration at Georgetown University. When she returned to Israel, she was appointed a manager of the European program at the Center of European Studies at the Interdisciplinary Center, which is now known as Weizmann University. And 2 years later, she was appointed director of said center. She also had various positions in both academia and in political appointments, including appointed by the Foreign Ministry of Israel to the Board of Trustees of the German-Israeli Future Foundation. And she was also invited to observe the German general elections along with 20 other academic experts and many, many other achievements. Her expertise was sought often by the media as well. And in the last 10 years, she gave more than 500 interviews on both international and national news outlets. And we are very fortunate to have her today as our guest. So thank you for joining us, Doctor, and the stage is yours.
Thank you so much, and good evening to all of you. And I really thank you for all of you, and thank you for I would like to thank, of course, the International Diplomacy Initiative. Thank you, Lydia. Thank you, Tal. Thank you, Leo, for having me. I would, of course, going to share with you a PowerPoint presentation, so that's going to be easier for you. There's no doubt that the events of October 7 had a huge impact on Europe. Europe had experienced, many terrorist attacks in the last 20 years, the London attack in 2005, Madrid, in Paris, in Brussels, in Berlin, so multiple, terrorist attacks all over Europe. The question is, what makes actually October 7, which has actually happened outside Europe, so unique, and why it has a major impact on European politics? I would argue there are two different distinguishing features, two main features of the October 7 attack that really shocked many Europeans. And one of them was the cruelty of Hamas. Hamas terrorists did not only want to kill, Israelis, but they also raped, tortured, and massacred women. They beheaded babies and burned kids alive. And this type of cruelty was not really found in many European attacks. We saw it only in ISIS, but in most terrorist attacks in Europe, terrorists only wanted to kill as many people as possible. We saw it in Bataclan in Paris, we saw it in different places. But here, they really spend their time on torturing the victims. And there, I'm sure that many of you are familiar with the stories, but just one story that was really shocking for me, that in one case that were 25 men raped one woman, and they even forced her boyfriend to look. And at the end, they shot them in the head. There was another case, where they cut the woman's breast and then raped her. They beheaded babies. They spent time after beheading them, to burn them alive, to burn them. And of course, they burn also kids alive. So what happened here was really unimaginable. It wasn't just an act of terror, but real cruelty and barbarism. The other feature was the unexpected support given to Hamas just after these attacks. We saw a lot of, signs of solidarity all over Europe and in different places, in Berlin and in Paris, in Rome, in London as well. We saw a lot of solidarity with Israel, but at the same time, there were many other people. And in previous attacks, of course, we saw people lit candles, brought flowers, mourned the victims. While some people, of course, showed solidarity with the victims, many other people belonging to radical Islam and radical left went out to the streets supporting Hamas. They even justified the rape, torture, and massacre of women. And not only that, but they also kept calling for more violence against Jews, from the river to the sea, or using, of course, other repulsive slogans like "Gas the Jews" and "Kill all Jews." Became very popular. By the way, yesterday at Columbia University, there was also a kind of like a conference organized, an event organized by a group who supported Hamas. And once again, they justified the rape and massacre of women. So the reaction to the barbaric attacks, it's not just the attacks, the cruelty of the attacks, it's the reaction of the attacks that actually shock many Europeans. In many ways in Europe, among many Europeans, there was a kind of like an assumption that human rights are universal, the dignity of life and dignity of women. And I think the surprise was that many people, including the radical Islam, the radical left, and many human rights organizations, did not share this assumption. And there is a realization that fundamental Western values are under attack. When the European constitutions were written, when the German constitution was written, when the French constitution was written, when the American constitution was written, no one actually thought that we have to mention that killing is not okay, raping women is not okay, beheading kids is not okay. We thought it's something which is, taken for granted. And all of a sudden, many Europeans realize that we live with people who believe that raping women is okay, beheading kids is okay. And in a way, it led to a realization that we have two different civilizations, two different camps, two different value systems. In 1993, of course, all of you are familiar with Samuel Huntington, who published first the famous article in 1993. A few years later, we also published a book about the clash of civilizations, where we actually mention 8 civilizations: the Chinese, the Japanese, the European, the Orthodox, which is the Russian. So he mentioned basically 8 different civilizations. Here I suggest that we are looking at a clash of 2 civilizations. You can call it civilizations, you can call it, clash of 2 different value systems. But the bottom line, we have one civilization that was horrified by the brutality and cruelty of the terrorists, and the other civilization that glorified and celebrated this brutality. They celebrated the rape and massacre of women and butchering of innocent civilians. And I want to emphasize that the gap between the 2 civilizations is different than the differences that Europeans are used to. It's not a question of like, oh, I believe in socialism, or I believe in capitalism. I believe that the taxes are too high, or taxes are too low. We're talking about fundamental differences of what is acceptable human behavior. Whether you're living in Berlin or Bombay or Tokyo, you might have different worldviews, but both of you are likely to agree on the dignity of women, dignity of human life, and rejection of terrorism as acceptable form of human expression. And the Europeans thought, and many Europeans thought, that we live in a 21st century. And we answered these questions many years ago. We live in a 21st century. And now we deal with questions about gender equality, women empowerment. Many Europeans did not think that there are a large group of people living in Europe who do not even share the most basic rules of acceptable human behavior. We are not talking just about Western values. It's basic human behavior, basic acceptable human behavior. And I think, perhaps what was the most shocking is that so-called human rights and women's rights organization that was silent and did not condemn the terrorist attacks. In fact, many of them justified it. And I think, something like that I wanted to share with you. I saw it yesterday and I thought it was really nice. Yeah. Bill Cosby joins Hamas, so feminists will stop condemning him for rape. I mean, for many, many years, we were actually taught, human rights organization told us that human rights are universal. It doesn't matter what race you have. It doesn't matter what color you have. It doesn't matter where you come from. The bottom line is that we are all equal. So it was the left, especially the radical left, that supported and was supposed to be the defender of human rights, of women's rights, of all human, that human rights are inclusive, and they're diversified, and they are not. And here we saw that human rights seems to be that there is a very selective notion of human rights. And because of this, there is the realization that the enemies of Israel are also the enemies of Western culture and values. This is not just a war that Israel is fighting, but a war for the future of Europe. This is a fight for Western values and civilization. And many people actually joined the anti-Semitic, and it wasn't just a rally for, the rally against anti-Semitism in France that took place in November 12th, last month. It was, they call it pour la République. So it actually was like for the Republic, for the values of the French Republic, for the values of the European. So the fight is not just against anti-Semitism. The fight is not about the existence of Israel. The fight is about European values and what is considered to be acceptable behavior. So this event pushed many people to the right, which represents, from their perspective, a strong support for Western values. And I just want to give you, some indications. The first national election in Europe was in Netherlands. Before October 7, the prediction was that Wilders going to get 9% of the votes, and I want to show you here. That was the prediction, that he's going to get only 9% of the votes. But you can see here that Wilders actually end up as the biggest party in Netherlands, with more than almost 24% of the votes. Just, in terms of comparison, 2 years before, he got 10.8% of the votes in Netherlands. Now he gets almost 24% of the votes. And we don't know, but he has, of course, a big chance that he's going to be the next prime minister, of Netherlands. We see, it really depends. But the bottom line is that, in September, 3 months ago, the prediction was that he only is going to get 9% of the votes. And here he gets, of course, 24% of the votes. But we see it also in Wilders, I have to say, he comes across as someone who cares about, from their perspective, someone who wants to defend the Western values and civilization, someone who's arguing that is anti-Islamist. He believed that many actually Islamists support hate and terrorism. And many people believe that this is, from their perspective, the case, especially after seeing rallies in Europe. People actually not just only justify the rape and massacre of women, but also call for more violence against Jews. And in some demonstration, and it was very interesting, and I saw in Germany that one of the journalists asked one of the people who participated in a demonstration, pro-Hamas demonstration, and they asked him, so what's next? And he said, well, we're going to take over Berlin. We're going to take over Germany. And for me, I have to say it was a bit shocking. I saw in other demonstrations where people say, yes, we have to take over Italy. And I think this is something, of course, so it was kind of like calling for violence and, of course, for ethnic cleansing. And I think for many Germans, it was actually shocking. And Olaf Scholz, the Chancellor of Germany, he made it very clear, there is no place for anti-Semitism in Germany. And that, of course, we saw it in the Dutch election. And I want to show you that support for the far right continues to grow. And we see, for example, in Austria, there is election coming up in Austria in 2024. And according to the prediction, Austria, the far right, is likely to get 29% of the votes. it's going to be the biggest party in Austria. Just in terms of comparison, in 2020, the right-wing populist FPÖ actually got 11% of the votes. And many people are saying that FPÖ is a major candidate for Austria to be Austrian chancellorship in 2024 elections. In Finland, we have the far-right party who came second in 2023. As you can see here, this is actually the Finns party came second. We see it also like in Sweden, you know, that the extreme right is one of the biggest parties. Another thing that we saw recently is, according to polls, AfD, Alternative for Deutschland, is the second biggest party in Germany with 20% of the votes. In France, Marine Le Pen, you know that next year there's going to be the election for the European Parliament. And Marine Le Pen parties, you know, the National Rally, is about to get 28% of the votes. Again, the biggest French faction for the European Parliament. And opinion polls, that was in September, that showed that she wins the first round in the next French election. And a recent poll from 17th of October showed that, of course, she has the lead for the European elections who are going to take place next year. Okay. The general trend, you know, like this is, we have to say that the general trend of voters leaning towards the right has been going on for some time. And it started actually in 2014. Many people think that it started because, you know, in 2015, after the refugee crisis, but it actually started a year before the refugee crisis. In 2014, there was a major election in the European Parliament, and we've seen that it was actually the Front National came in first. AfD got 7% of the vote. Denmark came in first, the right-wing parties in Austria as well. So we've seen it already, like the trend has been going on for the last 9 years. In 2014, of course, in 2015, there was the migration crisis in Europe, which eventually between 2015 to 2020, the European Union is getting more than 4 million refugees. Germany get half of them, 2 million refugees. And of course, in 2019, we have the elections, the European elections that clearly show you. Here you see that in the European, there was 751 members of the European Parliament. Today there are less because Britain actually left the European Union. But the bottom line, you can see that all the blue are the right or right-wing populist group. So out of 751 seats in the European Parliament, there are 269, less than 270 seats given to the Social Democrats, to the Greens, and of course to the radical left, where the majority of people in the parliament are actually leaning to the right. You can see it. So 2/3 of the European Parliament, those are members who belong to the right, or the conservative group, they call it, the European conformists, European liberals, and we have, of course, the populist parties. So altogether, we can see that there is a shift going on in the last 9 years. And the prediction is that, of course, that following, you know, what's happening now, those parties are likely to get more and more support. I just want to remind you that in the previous presidential election in France in 2022, Marine Le Pen got almost 42% of the votes. And there's really, many people actually assume that if she was running now, she would probably be the next, French president. Of course, we have a few more years, but nevertheless, it's very interesting to see those trends. It's very clear that, in the last few years, look, the discussion about immigration in Europe, it's been going on since the 70s. But the bottom line, in the last 10 years, it became a very hot topic in Europe. And where for many years, the question in Europe was whether immigrants considered to be a threat in terms of like whether or not they compete with locals for the same jobs, or whether or not they consider to be a threat for the national culture. In recent years, especially as Europe experienced so many terrorist attacks, the number one question was whether or not they considered they constitute a threat to the personal security, to the personal safety. And this concern, whether immigrants can be assimilated into the European culture, was even magnified after the October 7 attack, as it was clear that the discussion, it is not just about, this concern of whether immigrants can be assimilated into European culture was even magnified after the October 7 attack, because the discussion was not about whether or not Muslim girls can go to school or attend swimming classes. I remember that a few years ago, I met the Minister of Education in Bavaria. Apparently, we went also to the same school at Ludwig Maximilian University. We got a PhD from the same place. And he told me that in Bavaria, one of the concerns that they have and one of the challenges that they have with immigrants that typically come from Muslim countries is, for example, they have 60,000 people from Afghanistan, and they don't know what to do with the fact that the parents don't send the girls to schools because from their perspective, they believe that girls should stay at home. And the authority in Munich and in Bavaria, they really have it's a huge challenge for them, how to deal with parents. They don't want to send their kids. But here, the discussion, it's not about just whether or not Muslims can go to school or attend swimming classes. But there's not even an agreement about what are the norms of acceptable human behavior. If violence and rape is glorified, then people are afraid of their own personal safety. And a recent poll that was actually, I forgot to mention here, it was actually published in October 28, shown that 72% of the French people believe that similar attack can happen actually in France. I forgot to mention it here. I forgot actually to, that in France, in the last 10 years, in 2016, also in 2019, they had an opinion poll about how many people, there are roughly like 10%, between 10 to 15% of the people who live in France are of a Muslim origin. And they asked the people of a Muslim origin in France in 2016 and in 2019, do you believe that there should be a Sharia law for France? Sharia law means that, I'm sure that all of you understand what Sharia law, but basically to cancel democracy and have, instead of democracy in Europe, democracy in France, to have a regime which is basically like Iran, where women are forced to walk with hijab, and of course, and to be judged by Sharia law courts. In 2016, 30% of the French Muslims said that they actually support Sharia for France. In 2019, 46%, almost half of the Muslim population in France, actually said that they are supportive of Sharia for France. By the way, they stopped taking this poll since 2019. They no longer want to ask this question because I think in a way they're afraid. And I talked to a colleague of mine from Austria about this last week, and she said, Esther, we don't take these polls anymore because we are afraid. We don't want to know what the answer might be. But the bottom line, we see that, so this is something, of course, so after October 7, it was clear to many people that, in fact, it is the right-wing parties, not the left, that stand, especially the radical left, that stand for human rights and basic human rights. And I think that was a kind of a shock, because all those years, and I can tell you that personally, like all my life, I've been taught, and I believed that, it's the left, and of course the radical left, taught us to believe that they are the defender of human rights. They are the defender of women's rights. And all of a sudden we realize after October 7 attack that there is a selective application of human rights. Human rights are no longer universal. And they are no longer universal. And in fact, if you're Jewish, you're probably, and if you were raped, you're probably not likely to get the support of women's rights organization. And for the last few months, many women actually, of course, fought against it. But the bottom line is the understanding that it was the left wing, especially the radical left, who was taking off posters of hostages. It was the left radical and, of course, women's rights organization and human rights organization who justified the rape, massacre, and torture of women. They did not condemn it. And that was, in a way, that was the kind of like a feeling of betrayal, but also like a feeling that, because we've been taught that usually it is the left that's supposed to take care of human rights, of universal human rights. And that wasn't the case here. And in fact, it is the radical left and people who are associated with human rights who went to the street and called for more violence, called for the ethnic cleansing of Jews, called to gas the Jews, called for more racism and anti-Semitism. And I think many Europeans are terrified about the loss of basic human values, let alone European culture. I'm not talking about European culture. I'm talking about basic human values. And in a way, this explains why voting for the right and populist right appeals to many Europeans who are terrified about the loss of basic human values. The question is, of course, what are the possible trajectories for Europe? I'm a very optimist person, so I always like to offer, some future suggestions. There are two possible scenarios that Europe might take. One, of course, in my opinion, there are two possible paths that Europe might take. It might just continue of more of the same and be reactive to events of the ground, which means that policymakers will be afraid to enact strong legislation against terrorists and their supporters. And according to this view, if that will happen, I believe that, unfortunately, down the road, there will be a civil war in Europe. Not just between the Christians and the Muslims, but also between the moderate Muslims and other Muslims, and the radical Muslims. And this, because I only can see a polarization of the European public, if, of course, policymakers will not take a strong legislation against terrorists and their supporters. The other path is...
Esther, I'm sorry to cut you off a bit. I think there are some people with some questions. So maybe...
Yeah, I have. This is the last slide. That's it. That's the last slide. So in 1 minute, I'm going to be done. The other path Europe takes, and of course, Europe, the other scenario is that Europe takes a stronger action to defend its Western values, making sure that acceptable behavior is taught. I have to say that in the last 15 years, I've been doing meditation. And my meditation teacher in the US, he's a Buddhist, and he used to tell me that you cannot change other people. Buddhists do not believe that you can change other people. The only thing they believe is that you can change your reaction to them. I cannot change the Hamas. I cannot change the twisted way of thinking that raping is okay and killing is okay, but I can change my response to them. And And this is what I suggest, if you promote Western values in education system, in particular, those values, the dignity of life, dignity of women, non-violence, and of course, banning groups that promote racism and anti-Semitism and the selective application of respect for human rights, and not allowing protests to promote violence as a valid political means. And of course, even to deport people who support terrorist organizations, support ISIS, support, Sharia for Europe. So if you take actions, in order to protect the European citizens and to protect basic human rights and basic, of course, and Western values, then, of course, the future will be much better and brighter. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So if anyone has questions, just raise your hand and we'll see you and you can ask your questions aloud. Maybe people will shy or
I'm not going to kill or rape anyone, so it's okay. Please feel free to ask
maybe I'll still throw
Thank
something.
Yeah.
Hello, I'm joining in from Switzerland. So I didn't get the whole call, to be honest, but I was kind of writing down a question here, and it's not fully formulated yet. But what I wrote down so far is, where do you see the relation between this right-wing European political movement and maybe also the radical Islamic change, or just the radical Islamic push, or if there is any relation drawn?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, like, we know that, the bottom line, I think if you look at all far-right parties in Europe, it's very clear that from their perspective, and they call it like the Islamization of Europe, or the fact that there are many people in Europe that do not share with us. Of course, there are many moderate Muslims that would like to share with us our Western values and Western way of life. But the bottom line, there are many people who do not share with us the way of life. And I think that before October 7, we thought that we can deal with it, that we can face those challenges, and I mentioned, like the fact that girls from Afghan origin don't go to school in Bavaria because their parents, forbid them to go to school. So somehow, Germany was able to manage that. They said, okay, well, they're not going to take swimming classes as well. They're not going to go to school. But those are deeper questions. We're talking about really what is acceptable human behavior. Is violence acceptable? Raping women because as a tool is not as a mean to get a political aim is acceptable. Massacre and beheading, I mean, those are the things that we didn't think that in the 21st century we have to deal with those questions. We thought that those are the questions that we dealt with many years ago, and that's why they're not part of our constitutions. But I think maybe one thing that we should do is maybe really to include it and incorporate it in our constitutions, the European, the German constitutions, the French constitution. The bottom line, we thought that we have an agreement, unwritten agreement between us, that rape is not allowed, violence is not allowed, killing is not allowed. Those are the basic, this is not even Western values. We're talking about basic Western, human behavior. And if we fail to agree on that, then we really have a huge problem. That's why I talked about two civilizations. You cannot really bridge the gap between them. This is not a situation when you say, well, I'm in between. It's very clear. It's either you share our values, or you don't share our values. It's very, very clear. And that's why people are talking now about, they call it, there is a clarity now. We know where we stand. We know where we stand, and we know where other people stand. Before that, it wasn't clear to us. And now it's very clear that there are people who really put our life at risk, and put Europe at risk, and put the future of Europe at risk. And that is the realization that all of a sudden, and maybe we were suspected that maybe that's the case, but we didn't have any evidence. or not enough. And I think October 7th provided enough evidence. And the fact that people actually celebrated the rape, justified the rape, that was shocking. And I think here is very clear that there is no room for those two groups together, if you believe in basic human values and basic Western values, you cannot basically allow to live with someone who has a different worldview than you. So either he will have to adapt and come, to our camp, or, it's going to be much more difficult. Otherwise, we will end up, as I said, in a civil war or something much more worse. But yeah, so I don't see any other, so either we have a strong reaction and we make it very clear, this is unacceptable behavior. If you live in Europe, if you live, in Western Europe or live in Eastern Europe, it doesn't matter where you live. If you're part of our society, you have to abide by certain, so it's not just about climate change or recycling, or those are deeper questions. And that's why it frightens many people, the realization that we live with people that don't share with us necessarily our basic understanding about basic human behavior. Yeah. Oh, other questions? Stephen or Lisbeth? I'll be, Lisbeth, go ahead.
Hi, yes, so I hope you can hear me. I'm tuning in from Germany, and here in Europe we've been having in the last couple of years a lot of discussions around regulating the social media space and regulating also, I mean, everywhere essentially, but just generally regulating and how to combat the use of freedom of speech on social media. And I was wondering if because you talked a lot about the role of politicians in handling this conflict, but if you can kind of see this attack as also a foundation for future regulations regarding.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that I like about Europe is my husband is an American, we lived in America for many years, and I can tell you that the huge difference between America and Europe, actually, I'm more optimistic about Europe than I'm optimistic about America. I think that Europe has more chance of succeeding here than America. Because in America, this whole idea of freedom of speech, and we've seen that 2 days ago, there was the hearing in the Congress of 3 female presidents of so-called elite universities in America, Penn University, Harvard University, and MIT. And they were asked specifically, do you think that calling for genocide of Jews is okay? And I was shocked, and so many people were shocked around the globe by their answers. Well, it depends on the context. Or, well, it doesn't seem to conflict with Harvard Code of Conduct. And that's shocking. And I think that social media should definitely be part of it, because I think people have, I do not believe, and one of the things that I like about Germany, but in Europe in general, that no, freedom of speech is important, absolutely important. But the freedom for life, for women dignity, for human dignity is much more important. And if someone is calling specifically for genocide or for killing someone else, it shouldn't be allowed. The same way that it shouldn't be allowed. By the way, they were asked, because one of the female president, was of a Black origin, and she asked her, how would you feel if people call for the mass killing of Black people in America? So the bottom line, any chance for, any call for genocide of if another minority should be forbidden, but I think we should also have strong regulations. Absolutely. I think that we should definitely have strong regulations and make sure that people understand not everything is allowed. Yes, freedom of speech is important. But if your freedom of speech, if you use it to be racist against other people and to call for the ethnic cleansing of another minority, it could be the Jewish minority, it could be the Indian minority, by the way, the number 2 group in America, many people don't know that, which is suffering from hate crime in America, is actually people from Indian origin. And not so many people know that. So yes, that should be regulated. We should be very clear about this. No, not everything is allowed. And I think one of the things that we learned from Freud, the whole idea of sublimation, we have to be a little bit, like, we should be respectful of other people. Yes, we should be able to express our opinions, but not saying that rape is okay, massacre is okay, and continue to call for the, ethnic cleansing of other minorities. I saw also Stephen or Stav who would like to ask a question.
Yeah, I'm ready. I'll go.
Stephen, go ahead, and then it's a gender equality, so
Yes.
we'll stop afterwards. Yes.
Good idea. So
Yeah.
for the situation that's happening, as well as other things, but mainly this, what you see is a lot of people. We're talking about certain things as rape and also discriminating other minorities, and we're having a question about it. But what one has to understand is that there's also a lot of ignorance as well as brainwashing in terms of culture, as well as something that's social norms and also governmental wise. But my question is, how does one? You talk about a second ago that one cannot change these people.
Yeah.
But I believe that because of this way of thinking in these morals, it is actually affecting a lot of cultures. So my question is, how could one combat all of this? Because in a certain way it does affect our lives, because in not one way it'll be the other, so it'll affect the others that are not easily brainwashing them, and it's a lot of ignorance as well as not just looking at facts, but they'll ignore it and completely erase it in that way.
Stephen, I absolutely agree with you. Like, I actually published a piece 2 months ago for Israeli newspaper Kalkalist. And it was about, and people were actually quoted me afterwards. They said, wow, Esther, you're right. I said, people, and I made this experience, like many years ago when I talked to people about Israeli politics. And I was shocked that, people, the bottom line, yes, there are many people who are ignorant, but there are many people who they are familiar with the facts, but they have a certain worldview, and nothing is going to change them. Nothing is going to change them. And one of the things that was shocking is that in one of the demonstrations in New York, they asked one of the people who participated, poor Hamas supporter, they asked her, but what about the women that were raped? What about the women, the babies that were beheaded? And she said, well, it's fake news. And other people say, well, nevertheless, this is justified, because the most important thing is to have a Palestinian state. So the bottom line is that even if you provide people with the facts, they don't really care. Yes, there are people in the public, and we've seen it with opinion polls in Europe about when we ask, like in France, for example, more than 40% of the French people, support Israel, 20%, 43% support Israel, 20% support the Palestinians. And there are many people, like more than 30%, who are somewhere in between. They didn't make up their mind. Yes, so you want to provide facts to those people. You might be able to change them. But about the other people who went to the street and celebrated the rape, the torture, and massacre of women, if they justify that, nothing's going to change them. And I want to go back to, what Buddhists really believe. Yes, we cannot change other people. Some people we might change because they are somewhere in between. But there are people that we will never be able to change their mind. But the only thing that we can do is to change our reaction to them. Only if we're going to be tougher with them. That's the only way to save Europe, to save Western society and the world, not just Europe, by making sure that we combat, we are sure to teach that acceptable behavior is taught in Muslim schools, in the mosques. I heard that some imams are being exported, from Turkey or from other countries, from Afghanistan. And sometimes we have to be tough, and sometimes it means that we have to deport people who actually believe that Germany should be a Sharia state or France should be a Sharia state, and they support violence and oppression of women. And we have to take a strong action. That we don't have the option here to be silent. There's no option to be silent. If we're going to be silent, we're going to lose Europe. We're going to lose not just Europe, but definitely that's going to be the case. We cannot allow people who think that raping is okay and beheading is okay. This is unacceptable behavior. So we have to ban those groups that promote racism and selective application of respect for human rights. And we should not allow protesters who promote violence and make it very clear that they look for, they call for genocide. So it really depends on we cannot change other people, but we can change our reaction. And tougher legislation and tougher reaction would definitely help you. Stav.
Hi. Thank you, first of all, for your time. You're talking a lot about the way that the government is going to handle these immigrants and maybe deporting people that are not in the same values as the Western world. Yeah. But we can see a trend of people that are native European, that are starting to empathize with those values, with those raping values, and all of it. And in even further cases, you can see people converting their religion, getting married, joining completely to that goal. So the question is whether governments can do with those people that are European born and raised.
It's an excellent question. Look, one of the things that, and I was very happy, actually, I read today in the newspaper that in Germany, Saxony-Anhalt came up with a new legislation. They want to come up with a new legislation that every person who's going to get a German citizenship in their, because Germany is divided to Länder, so in their land, he has to have to state writtenly that he supports the existence of the state of Israel, and he never actually and so basically, and I can tell you that my niece, she got a new job in Israel, a few weeks ago, and she told me that I went with a contract, and in the contract it was written, they asked her specifically, are you a part of a crime organization? Is anyone in your family's kind of I don't know, mafia or crime organization? Do you support terrorism? Are you supportive of terrorism? And also in America, by the way, to get a citizenship, so yes, you're talking about people who are citizens of Europe. What do you do then? So yes, first, to make sure that you're not going to allow those people to act. They won't be able to demonstrate freely and to go to the streets and say that they're calling, for ethnic cleansing of other people or support. It should be forbidden according to the law. You cannot go to the street and justify and celebrate the rape and torture of women. You cannot go to the street and actually justify ethnic cleansing or genocide of other people. That should be not allowed. So even if you're citizens, and also for every place that you're going to work, assuming those people would like to work somewhere, you will have to sign maybe a document that says, I do not support terrorism. It's not just about Hamas. We have terrorist groups in Europe. We have ISIS. We have other groups, people actually, so we have Sharia movements. So that has to be clear. So if people are going to be afraid, and the only way, and also if people are going to be penalized financially, they're going to be afraid. One of the reasons why many people in America are going with a mask now, it's not because of the corona. They don't want people to identify them. Because now there's an organization that says stop anti-Semitism, and what they do, they take photos of them, and so people are afraid. Can you imagine yourself, you pay $60,000, $70,000 for Harvard University a year. My students in GW, they paid $60,000 a year, $240,000 for 4 years. And then you're not going to get a job. So when people are going to be penalized, what do you think is the biggest fear of Harvard University, Columbia University, MIT? Believe me, all those 3 women, I'm sure that they don't really care about the women that were raped, and they're very anti-Semitic. They care about funding, money. The biggest fear is that the US, because there's a lot of federal funding, we fund those universities. And there's a fear that federal funding is going to be withheld from them. And that is the biggest fear of those universities. So yes, if you have a tougher legislation and at the same time you penalize those people financially and you don't hire them, you know, like you don't give funding to institutions to support them, then we're going to see some changes. Absolutely. Lucas. Hey, Lucas, how are you?
Hey, Esther, how you doing?
Good.
I am actually walking. This is the strangest Zoom call I've ever been on. I hope you can hear me semi-well. First of all, thank you so much for doing this. And I've been looking forward to this because I actually wanted to talk to someone from Israel. I've been wanting to talk to someone from Israel for so long about this whole situation. And I do have a question for you, but it's a critical question. But
Absolutely, go ahead. It's
I
okay.
hope you know that it's in good faith.
Absolutely. We don't rape and kill people if they think differently than us. That's okay.
I know you don't. I know you don't. So my question is, and it's an impression of mine because I follow you and I follow other colleagues from Israel on social media, and I noticed that you are, understandably, a very engaged, and you post a lot. But my question for you is, I have the feeling that you sometimes conflate those very indefensible individuals who are very pro-Hamas and who, ignore or deny all these atrocities that they committed with protesters who are, who have genuine gripe with the actions of the Israeli military with the situation in Gaza. So I was wondering, is there a distinction between those two groups? Because I mean,
look, I'm sure. No, it's a good question. It's a valid question, and I think, look, I have to tell you that personally, like all my life, I, voted for left-wing parties in Israel, very supportive of the idea of Palestinian state. Although now I'm kind of in a shock, I have to say. Yeah. But I have to say that, for many years, I absolutely like, and for me, it's of course it's unfortunate, what's happening. But yes, I'm sure that there are people who are, sort of like they don't like the fact that people in Gaza, because Israel, of course, has to protect itself. So it's kind of like naturally, we want to minimize, the killing of people, and usually we target, only terrorists, because I think there's something like, the assumption is like there are 40,000, I don't know exactly the numbers, of terrorists. So, I mean, that's the bottom line. And naturally, unfortunate things happen. And it could be that in those demonstrations, there are people who only support, support Palestinian statehood, and that's it. The thing is that, and that's the thing, Lucas, I didn't hear a lot of people from the left. And also, I think for me, I felt betrayed because all my life I said that I'm a feminist and I believe in all those women organizations, women rights organizations. I felt very betrayed because I want those people to tell me that raping women is not okay. Massacring women is not okay. Butchering human beings is not okay. And I didn't hear them. I didn't hear a lot of, and from the Muslim community, I expected to hear a lot of people going to say, this is not Islam. I mean, there are a lot of imams in Germany. How many imams in Germany really say this is not Islam? We think that what they did is horrible. I haven't heard. I heard in Israel some people, but only few, not so much. So I want those people to say, yes, I believe in Palestinian statehood, but at the same time, I think that what happened to those women in Israel is horrible. By the way, not only women were raped. I learned 2 days ago that also men were raped. I didn't know that, by the way. Not only that, they pull eyes, body parts from people, like people were burned alive. Also, some women were beheaded. And I want those people to say, yes, I believe in Palestinian statehood, but at the same time, I think it was horrible what the Hamas did. I am very much against it. And I didn't hear those people. I want to hear those people. Yes, so when they're going to say that, definitely I would welcome them, and I will have a coffee with them at the same time, but I didn't hear them, and they need to be heard. And if I don't hear them, it means that, when you're silent, and you cannot be silent here. This is either you are against rape and massacre, or you are in favor. If you don't say anything, you cannot be unidentified. It's impossible.
I agree with you 100%. I'm just, I think for me personally, it's difficult to navigate this. Me being I mean, I hope you know, I am a friend of Israel.
I know, it's a very good friend. I know that.
At the same time, I am having the hardest time to side with the IDF, with the actions in Gaza, with the enormity of the bombardment that's going on, and the immense suffering of the Palestinian population.
I think, look.
So that's so difficult to I mean, for me personally, but I think for also a lot of leftists.
I think look, the thing is that many years ago, someone told me, I would have loved to say that it was human rights organization that actually were able to bring to the end of the Second World War. But it was actually soldiers with guns that actually put an end to the Second World War. So sometimes, unfortunately, by the way, we've seen it in Yugoslavia, in the 90s, like for 10 years, for 9 years until NATO invasion in 1999, there was no, like sometimes we have to use guns. Sometimes we have to use soldiers in order to put an end to a war or to fight for our independence. Israelis were attacked. They were attacked. We were attacked. We were massacred. We were raped. And we want to defend ourselves against people who think and believe that we have no right for existence. And I think for me, Lucas, I think the thing that really made me upset is when I read the poll, it was published a week ago, that 98%, Lucas, 98% of the people in Gaza say that they support what the Hamas did. And for me, it was shocking. I thought, I didn't realize 98% of the people thought it was okay to rape and kill. So for me, it was shocking, because I want to believe that many people are innocent. But if you support that, for me, it was very difficult. And the fact that, we have people civilians who participated in a massacre and in the attack, that was even more difficult. But that 98% of the people of Gaza believe that it's okay and are proud of the Hamas, for me, that was shocking. I see Lior and I see Alex. Lior. I cannot hear you. You're on mute. Yes.
Alex, I've been waiting longer than me, so I think you should go first.
Yeah, so Alex, go ahead.
Appreciate that. Thank you. And it's so nice to see you, Dr. Lopatin. Been waiting as well a whole week for this. I'm currently in New York, and it's Pearl Harbor Memorial Day. And the current government in America has been supporting Israel in a great way throughout the last couple months. But within the Democratic Party, the more left-leaning wing of the Democratic Party has been super critical of everything happening throughout the war. So my question to you is what is going to happen? What do you think is going to happen next year when there's elections in Israel, and maybe Israel won't have a right-wing government anymore, or an extreme right-wing government anymore? What is going to happen to the relations that Israel has with countries like Austria, Hungary, Czechia, and how could that change maybe the relationship that Israel has with countries that oppose Israel, like Spain or Luxembourg?
Yeah. Look, the bottom line is that I'm not sure what's going to happen. Netanyahu, it's very clear, he's going to step down because he's not going to stay there forever. He's been the prime minister for many years, and I'm sure that he's not likely to be the next prime minister of Israel. But at the same time, I believe that many people are more. I think what happened on October 7th shocked many people. Remember that some of the hostages were people who were taking patients from Gaza cancer patients every Tuesday to Tel HaShomer, to a hospital in Israel, so they can get a treatment. So it was a shock. And one of the hostages even said, we were taking care of Palestinians. We took them to, to get medical care in Israel. So I think it was a shock. And remember that most of the people who were attacked actually coming from the kibbutzim. They are very left-wing oriented. So for them, it was a shock. So I believe that it definitely, some people will change their political orientation. I think more people are going to be more centrist oriented. That's my feeling. But I don't think we're going to have like a very strong left, as it's going to be very much like in Europe. What's happening in Europe is going to happen in Israel. But the bottom line is the right-wing parties, conservative parties are going to be much more powerful, exactly like in Europe. It's the same, scenario. I want to say something about, like anti-Islamist parties in Europe. For many years, Israel had a very bad, they didn't want to have good relations with them. And I can understand that, like they didn't want to have Marine Le Pen or host people from the FPA in Austria, or they have a very critical view of those people. The bottom line is that we have to understand that, and so I believe that eventually Israel will have a strong, more and more relations with conservative and right-wing parties, because they come across in Israel as the one that defend human rights, the one that defend anti-Semitism. And this is really weird, because 20 years ago, the FPA, the right-wing extremist party in Austria, was very anti-Semitic. The father of Marine Le Pen was very anti-Semitic. He's still one. And now we see a change of people that actually seems to believe that there is a kind of like, we share common values and we have to fight together against common enemies. So one thing, realization that many Israelis have after the October 7 attack, that even if you belong to the left, and I'm telling you as someone who, basically all her life voted for left-wing parties, there's a shock, because I cannot be associated with the radical left. No, I cannot be associated with people who think that raping is okay and massacre of women is okay. Absolutely not. So I think that for many years, many Israelis wanted to be associated or convince them or to be in their side, because it's much more attractive to be with radical left than radical right, but the bottom line is that many people, I saw some of the reactions in Israel to the fact that Wilders, won the election. And I think 10 years ago, people would not be so happy, but now people are very happy. And they said, yes, especially as he defends, Israelis against anti-Semitism. And so I believe that there's going to be a kind of like more strong bond for Israeli politicians with more right-wing politicians in Europe. I'm sure that this is going to be the trend. I'm sure. I mean, I'm very sure that this is going to be the trend, because you want to be friends with people that like you. I cannot be friends with people that not only they don't like me, it's not that they don't like my jacket or they don't like my hair, they don't like my existence. They want me to disappear. So this is a huge difference. I cannot be friends of those people. That's very clear. And I think we, like what happened in October 7, we make us realize that who are our friends, and we have to stick with our friends. And sometimes you have friends that, ideally you want to have other friends, but those are your friends, and sometimes you have to embrace people that like you, that don't want to kill you. And that's very important, I think, realization. Leo? Someone else would like to ask?
So unfortunately, we are running out of time.
Yes.
If you're willing to stay, I can keep the Zoom open if anyone wants to, but just so we'll finish it now. The official one is about to come.
Okay.
So I'll ask a final question, which actually you started addressing right now, because I know that from my perspective as an Israeli, seeing that suddenly the far right wing of Europe is our allies was very confusing and also kind of scary, because for a lot of us was like, wait, how is it that Le Pen is the one leading the march for fighting anti-Semitism?
Yes. Yeah.
And a lot of people here feel that, okay, they're not our allies because they because they have something with us. It's because they hate them more than they hate us. And once this is over, we might be the next ones. So
Look,
there's a lot of common fear there that how
absolutely.
much.
Look, it's a very good question. Look, think about the Second World War. America cooperated with the Soviet Union. They were enemies, but they cooperated because they had common goal. We don't know what's going to happen down the road, but for the moment, look, I met when I was was an observer in the German election sent by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Germany, along with other 20 experts. We had to meet with different people from different political parties. At the end, I was invited by the Green Party to celebrate, but I met people from the AfD also. I met people from the SPD, from the CDU, from different parties in Germany. And when I met the people from the AfD, I was shocked. I was like, wow, God, you're from Israel. We love Israel. And I was like, what's happening here? Like I was in a state of shock because all my life, I knew that right-wing, far right is actually the enemy of Israel because they were anti-Semitic for many years. But what happened? They changed their opinion in the last 20 years because for many years they thought that Israel is their enemy. And then they realized because of Muslim migration in Europe, because the difficult assimilation of Muslims and also Sharia movements in Europe, they realized, oh, wait a second. Actually, the Jews are assets for Europe. And we love the Jews. We want them to be here. And some years ago, it was the far right-wing party when many French citizens came to Israel, migrated to Israel because of anti-Semitism in France. It was the far right leader who said, like, if you don't feel comfortable in France, you should come to Austria. And that was shocking. So I feel, and when you talk to those people, you realize they don't really, yes, I'm sure that some people are racist. Some people could be anti-Semitic, but today, make no mistake, anti-Semitism, to a large extent, is coming from the radical left and from radical Islamists. Make no mistake. Most people who actually express anti-Semitism today in Europe and also in America are coming usually, mostly from the radical left. It could be some people in the right, far right that are also anti-Semitic. But we know it, for example, in the German election, to say that the 22% of the people who are likely to vote for AfD, for Alternative for Deutschland, are xenophobic is not true. We know that 69% of the people who voted in the 2017 elections in Germany actually voted for AfD, for the far-right party in Germany, because they were very disappointed of Merkel's policy. So it's not that all the people who vote for AfD are xenophobic. I refuse to accept that. Absolutely not. And I can tell you that in France, in Austria, in Netherlands, I had students, like European students who told me, my family vote for Wilders. My family vote for the far right in Austria. And those are not racist people. Yes, there are racist elements, I'm sure. But make no mistake, most people who are anti-Semitic and express the call for the annihilation and destruction of the Jewish people are actually from the radical left today. Yeah.
Thank you. We'll have to make an official closing now, but
yes,
if you're willing, I actually have a follow-up question, so I'll get to the conversation. So as I said, the event is officially over. Thank you all for coming. For anyone who stayed, I know some people already had to go a little earlier. As I mentioned before, this is the first event in a series. Lucas mentioned, I don't know if he's still here, also mentioned about talking about other elements of the sword that are not really Esther's field of expertise. So actually, our next event is about navigating the legal complexities of international law in the wars. So specifically, Lucas, you might be interested in that. On December 21st, we'll be publishing it soon. So look for International Diplomacy Initiative on social media or wherever you heard of us maybe for now. And so if you're willing, I'll be happy. I actually have a follow-up question, so I'll be able to continue.